Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. I don't know what it was that first drew me to the flea market that day. Maybe it was the crispness in the air, or perhaps the quiet thrill of uncovering something old, something lost in time. But whatever it was, it pushed me there, into that labyrinth of forgotten relics and dusty memories. The moment I stepped through the narrow, crooked entrance, I could feel it. The air was thick with secrets, with the weight of objects that had lived lives far beyond mine. It was intoxicating. I made my way through the rows of tables, each piled high with junk. Old books with pages yellowed by time. Tarnished brass lamps that seemed to hold the stories of the people who once owned them. Chipped porcelain dolls whose glass eyes seemed to follow my every movement. But my gaze was elsewhere. There was something else calling me, something that didn't belong. At the back of the market, almost tucked away from sight, I spotted it, an object that felt out of place. It was a large, dark mirror draped in a weathered cloth. It was hidden behind stacks of old furniture, and yet it beckoned. I felt it in my chest, this undeniable pull. As I drew closer, the cloth stirred, just slightly, as though the mirror itself was breathing, waiting for something. I couldn't explain why, but my hand reached out almost of its own accord. My fingers brushed the edge of the cloth, and for a moment I hesitated. Something cold, almost electric, surged up my spine, but my curiosity got the better of me and I pulled the cloth away. The mirror beneath it gleamed in the dim light, its mahogany frame intricately carved with patterns that seemed to dance, to move as my eyes followed them. But it wasn't the frame that pulled me in, it was the glass. The surface was fogged, distorted, and when I peered into it, I saw me. At least, I thought it was me. My reflection was off. I could see my own face, but it wasn't quite right. My eyes, usually a soft hazel, appeared darker, almost hollow, like black pits that were draining the light from the room. My lips curled into a grin that wasn't mine. A grin twisted in a way that made my skin crawl. For a moment, I could have sworn the reflection was alive, watching me with an intensity that made my heart race. "Not like the others, is it?" came a voice from behind me. I jumped, my breath catching in my throat. The old man from the stall had appeared, stepping slowly from behind a pile of books. His glasses perched precariously on the edge of his nose, and his hands were trembling as he wiped dust from a small figurine on the counter. His voice was gravelly, like he had swallowed years of warnings, but his eyes, they held something I couldn't quite place. "Buy it if you must," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But you'll regret it, girl. It's not just a mirror." I turned to face him, half smiling, my curiosity piqued. "What's wrong with it?" I asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it from him. The old man's eyes narrowed, as if considering something deeply. "It's an old one," he murmured, his words low and cautious. "It's been passed down through generations. The family that owned it, they vanished, disappeared, and that thing—" He paused, his lips pressing together in a tight line. "It doesn't reflect just your image, it shows what could be." I shook my head, dismissing his words as the ramblings of an eccentric, superstitious old man. I'd always been the type to dismiss such things. Ghost stories, curses, haunted objects. They were just stories, right? But when I looked back at the mirror, my reflection was no longer just distorted, it had shifted. The eyes staring back at me were darker now, even deeper, and the grin, it was still there. But it wasn't my smile anymore. It was something hungry, something knowing. I couldn't look away. The old man stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. $50. Take it with you. But once you do, you'll never be able to escape it. I didn't listen. I wasn't afraid, not then. Maybe I should have been. I paid the man and, without another word, walked away with the mirror carefully wrapped in an old, dusty cloth. As I made my way through the market, a strange chill settled in my bones. But still, I couldn't stop thinking about that reflection. It called to me. The more I thought about it, the more I realized it had been the thing I'd been searching for my entire life. The thing I didn't know I needed. I didn't feel the weight of the warning. I was too eager, too obsessed. The moment I stepped through the door of my apartment, I unwrapped the mirror, setting it gently against the wall. I couldn't wait to see myself in it again, to understand why it had unsettled me so. As I stood in front of it, I found myself staring at the same reflection. But this time, it was different. The eyes that stared back at me were darker, black as pitch. The grin twisted wider. I blinked, and my reflection blinked too, but the moment I did, the face in the mirror seemed to smile at me. Not a friendly smile. I felt my breath catch, my heart skip. Something inside me, some primal instinct, screamed at me to turn away, but I couldn't. I couldn't tear myself from the glass. I didn't know it then, but I had already crossed a line. The mirror had chosen me, and it wouldn't let go. I don't know why I went to the flea market that day. I didn't have a specific reason, no real purpose other than to pass the time, to lose myself in the forgotten relics that filled the air with the scent of history. But when I stepped into the market, something changed. The chill in the air seemed to grow thicker. The quiet murmur of voices somehow drowned out by the pounding in my chest. There was something about the place. Something old, something waiting. I walked through the maze of rusted metal, cracked porcelain, and dust-covered trinkets. Each booth seemed to have its own heartbeat, a rhythm I could almost feel in my bones. And then I saw it. Tucked away in the farthest corner, half hidden behind piles of faded furniture, was a mirror. It wasn't like the others. This one had a dark, ornate frame, carved with intricate designs that seemed to shift ever so slightly as my eyes moved across them. The glass was foggy, warped, like it had been sitting in some forgotten attic for 100 years. There was something about it, something that pulled at me. I didn't understand it at first, but my feet moved on their own, guiding me toward it. I reached out, my fingers trembling, drawn to the mirror like a moth to a flame. "Careful with that one," came a voice, rough and tired, from behind me. I turned. An old man, hunched over and wearing thick, fogged glasses, was watching me. His eyes seemed to pierce through me, like he knew something I didn't. "It's not just a mirror," he muttered, almost to himself. "It's seen things no one should ever see." I laughed it off, because what else could I do? It was just an old mirror, right? A relic, an antique, just glass and wood. Nothing more. But when I looked back at it, something caught my breath. The reflection, my reflection, was wrong. My face stared back at me, but it wasn't exactly me. The eyes were too dark, too hollow, like the light itself had been sucked from them. And my mouth stretched into an expression I didn't make. It twisted, like it had been forced into that grin, unnatural and hungry. My heart started to race. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. The reflection stayed there, staring at me, watching me. The old man's voice cut through my growing panic. $50, he said, his hand trembling as he reached out with a price tag. "It's been passed down through generations, but be careful. It doesn't reflect just your image." I didn't know what he meant, but I couldn't stop myself. There was something magnetic about it, something that wouldn't let me leave. Without another word, I handed him the money. I took the mirror home that afternoon. It wasn't much of a room, just a small apartment, a place to sleep, to eat, to exist. I set the mirror up against the wall, admiring the intricate carvings on the frame, the dark wood that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. I felt drawn to it in a way I couldn't explain. As night fell, the shadows in the room deepened. The air grew heavy, thick with something I couldn't name. But still, I stood in front of it. I had to look again to make sure it was just my imagination, to prove that the reflection wasn't really as strange as it had seemed. But when I saw my face again, I froze. At first, it was subtle. My reflection didn't quite match my movements. A slight delay when I raised my hand, when I blinked. And then, the eyes. They were darker, emptier than before, as though the glass was swallowing me whole. And my mouth. That grin was back, stretching wider and wider, far too wide for any human face. I took a step back. The reflection didn't move with me. It stayed, locked in place, its grin widening, becoming a twisted, mocking version of myself. I couldn't tear my eyes away, and then something else. The reflection shifted. It wasn't just mimicking my movements anymore. It was alive, twisting, as though something in the mirror was fighting to break free. It was me, but it wasn't. The face was too twisted, the smile too wide, the eyes too empty. I took another step back, my heart hammering. My reflection stayed. I turned to leave, but the moment I did, my reflection didn't follow. It stayed behind, and then it did something it shouldn't have done. It grinned. That was when I realized my reflection wasn't mimicking me anymore. It wasn't just showing what was in front of it, it was watching me, hunting me. My breath caught in my throat as I turned, frantic now, wanting to get away, to tear my eyes from that thing in the glass. But it wasn't just the reflection anymore. It was alive, pushing against the boundaries of the mirror, stretching, writhing, like it wanted out. And I was trapped in front of it, caught between the world of glass and the world I knew. I staggered back, my knees weak, my hands shaking. But when I turned again, my reflection had changed. The grin. It wasn't just a grin anymore, it was a mouth. A gaping hole in the glass, stretching wide, wider than it should have been, like it was preparing to speak. It leaned forward, as though it were trying to reach out. And I knew, it was no longer me staring back. It was something else. Something that had been waiting in the dark glass. Something that wanted to take me. I couldn't run. I couldn't scream. I was already gone. I didn't want to admit it at first, but I knew something was wrong. At first, it was just a passing thought, a fleeting sensation, something I could shake off. But with each passing day, it became harder and harder to ignore. The mirror, that mirror, was calling to me. It wasn't like I was obsessed with it, not at first. But there was something about the way it shimmered in the dim light of my bedroom. Something about the pull it had on my gaze that unsettled me in ways I couldn't explain. I'd walk by it, and my eyes would inevitably flicker toward the glass. I'd tell myself, just one look. But once I saw my reflection, I couldn't look away. It wasn't just the way I looked, it was the way the mirror looked back at me. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I tried to avoid it. I really did. I tried to stay busy, to focus on anything else, but when the silence grew too thick and the weight of the apartment pressed in around me, I'd find myself back in front of the mirror. My feet would take me there, as though they had a mind of their own. And each time, the reflection grew stranger. more wrong. At first, it was just subtle. My eyes, usually a soft hazel, started to seem darker, almost hollow, as though something inside me was being drained with every look. The smile. I don't know why I noticed it, but I did. It wasn't right. It twisted in ways I couldn't control, stretching further, like it wanted to pull my face apart. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, something my mind was doing to me. But the more I stared, the more alive the reflection became. I'd blink, and my reflection wouldn't blink at the same time. I'd move my hand, and the reflection would follow. But it always felt like a moment too late, like it was waiting for me to move first. And then there was the grin. It started small, a faint quiver at the edges of my mouth, but then it grew, wider, more twisted, until it was no longer a simple smile, but a grotesque thing that stretched across my face, as though it was tearing me apart from the inside. I tried to step away. I couldn't. My feet were rooted to the floor, as though the mirror had a grip on me that I couldn't shake. My reflection stared back at me with those empty eyes, and I felt it. It waiting. It was waiting for me to do something. Waiting for me to let go. The more I fought, the more I lost control. There were moments when I could feel my body responding before my mind could catch up. I'd stand in front of the mirror, my hand trembling at my side, and then I'd find myself reaching out toward it. Slowly, almost instinctively. The reflection did the same, its fingers pressing against the glass, too slowly, as if it were trying to pull me in. That's when it happened. One night, after what felt like hours of staring at that glass, my fingers touched it. Just a light brush at first, but then it happened. The glass, it wasn't cold anymore. It was warm, almost hot to the touch, and the reflection didn't move in sync with me anymore. It was no longer a mirror. It was something else. I stepped back in horror. My hand dropped to my side, but the reflection, it stayed there. The figure in the glass was still smiling, that twisted, wicked grin that never seemed to fade. It wasn't a reflection anymore. It wasn't me. Not entirely. I couldn't pull away. I couldn't stop myself from looking. And that's when I realized it was calling me. The reflection wasn't just mimicking me. It wanted to be me. That night, I stayed up long after the darkness had settled in. I couldn't sleep. The mirror called to me, louder now, in the silence of the apartment. The stillness seemed to wrap around me like a shroud, and the only thing I could hear was the distant echo of that grin, stretching in my mind. I found myself, once again, standing before it, my heart racing in my chest. It was waiting for me. The reflection was waiting for me to make the next move. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was a thing that was growing stronger with every look, with every moment I stood there, unable to look away. I tried to step back. I couldn't move. My feet were frozen, my body still. I was trapped by the reflection that had taken hold of my very soul. And then it smiled. The grin spread wider, too wide, stretching beyond what should have been possible. I could feel it in my own face, feel it tugging at my lips, pulling me into its hunger. I could feel it now, more than ever. It was inside me. It wasn't just a reflection anymore. It was something else, something darker. It was pulling me in, wrapping itself around me like a vine, until I couldn't tell where I ended and it began. I wanted to scream, I wanted to run, but I couldn't. The reflection in the mirror, it wasn't just a twisted version of me, it was me, and it was coming for me. I should have known better. I should have listened to Sarah when she first started getting worried. But I couldn't help myself. The mirror had a hold on me, and every time I tried to look away, I found myself drawn back, standing in front of it. staring into the dark reflection that was slowly becoming my reality. It was Sarah who first noticed the change. She had been my best friend for years, more like a sister than a friend, and she could always see when something was wrong, even when I tried to hide it. I hadn't been answering her calls, hadn't been responding to her messages. I'd been avoiding her. Hell, I had been avoiding everyone. But Sarah wasn't the kind of person who would let me get away with that. She showed up one afternoon, unannounced as usual, with that determined look on her face. The one that told me she wouldn't leave until she got some answers. "Claire," she said the moment she stepped into my apartment. Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. "What's going on? You've been pulling away from me. You're not answering my calls. I'm worried about you." I opened my mouth to give some excuse, but nothing came out. How could I explain it to her? How could I explain that every time I looked in the mirror, I wasn't just seeing myself, I was seeing something else, something other? "I'm fine, Sarah," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Just tired, you know." But she wasn't buying it. She walked past me into the living room, her eyes scanning the apartment with that sharp, perceptive gaze. And then, her eyes fell on it. The mirror. The one thing in the room that had been haunting me, pulling me deeper into whatever dark place it had created. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the way her gaze lingered on the glass, the way her eyes narrowed just slightly. She could see it too. I watched her take a few slow steps toward it, almost cautiously as if she could feel it too, the oppressive weight in the air. "Is it that?" she asked quietly, her voice now softer, more cautious, but no less concerned. I froze. Her eyes were locked on the mirror. She wasn't asking if I was okay anymore. She was asking if I had finally lost it. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't want to admit it. I didn't want to say the words out loud because I knew, deep down, that once I did, there would be no turning back. But her eyes, those eyes, knew. They always knew. "I know it sounds crazy," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to sound calm, "but it's just an old mirror. There's nothing wrong with it." But I knew that wasn't true, and so did Sarah. She looked at me, her gaze softening, but the concern was still there, like a shadow, lingering in the corners of her eyes. She took another step toward it. "Claire, this thing, it's changing you," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm, like she was trying to get through to me, to reach whatever part of me had gotten lost in the reflection. "I've seen you look at it. I've seen how it's making you act. You're not the same. You don't even feel the same." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I knew I wasn't the same, but I couldn't admit it, not to Sarah, not to anyone. "I'm fine," I repeated, but this time the words felt hollow. They tasted wrong on my tongue. She didn't believe me, of course. She stepped closer to the mirror, her eyes flicking back and forth, as if searching for something in the glass. Then, with an almost imperceptible shudder, she stopped. Her body went rigid. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Claire." I didn't need to see her face to know what she was looking at. I didn't need to look at the mirror to feel it. The way the reflection had shifted, how it had changed since the last time I'd seen it. The eyes in the mirror were darker now, like two black holes that pulled the light from the room. The grin that had been a mere twitch of the lips before was now wide. Too wide, impossibly wide, stretching to an unsettling degree. And there, in the reflection, it wasn't just me anymore. There was something else. Something that wasn't me. Something twisted. The reflection was alive. My reflection, the one I'd been seeing for weeks, wasn't me. Not anymore. It was becoming something else. It had its own mind, its own presence, and every time I looked at it, It seemed to take more of me with it. More of my thoughts. More of my soul. I couldn't breathe. I felt my knees weaken, my chest tightening, as I took a hesitant step backward. But I knew that even if I tried to leave, I'd never escape it. It had already started to change me. The more I stared into it, the more the reflection twisted, the more alive it became. "Sarah, don't," I whispered, my voice ragged. "Don't look into it anymore." But it was too late. She was already standing there, transfixed. I could see her face, but not in the way I should have. Her reflection was staring back at her with eyes that were not hers, and that grin, it mocked her. It was me, but it wasn't. "I told you, Claire," Sarah said, her voice trembling, her eyes still glued to the glass. "This thing isn't just a mirror, it's something else, something evil." I wanted to scream, to tear my eyes away, but I couldn't. My reflection was grinning at me, a deep, malicious smile stretching wider, wider, until I thought it might tear the mirror apart. And then, just as Sarah's gaze flickered back to mine, I saw it. The reflection didn't match my movements. The smile, my smile, widened unnaturally. The eyes in the glass became darker, like they were pulling me in, and the reflection didn't follow my lead anymore. It stayed frozen. Its face no longer mirrored mine. It was becoming something new, something hungry. "Get rid of it," Sarah whispered, her voice full of fear, her gaze still locked on the glass. "Before it takes everything from you." I wanted to reach out, to tell her I could still stop it, that I was still me. But deep down, I knew that whatever had taken hold of me, it wasn't going to let go. The reflection in the mirror, it was already winning. I never should have gone back to that damn antique shop. I knew, deep down, that once I brought the mirror home, there was no going back. But I didn't understand then. I didn't know what I was dealing with. I should have listened to Sarah. She'd been trying to reach me, trying to pull me back from the edge. But I was lost, obsessed with that mirror. Every time I looked into it, it felt like something was pulling at me from the other side, something dark and hungry, waiting to take me. I couldn't stop myself from staring into that glass. I couldn't tear myself away. And now, here I was, walking back to Ashford's Curiosities, the same shop where I'd found the cursed object. It wasn't just an antique. It was something far worse, something that had wormed its way into my soul. The man who ran the shop, Gregory Ashford, had seen the mirror before. He knew what it was. He had warned me. But I didn't listen. And now, as I stepped into the dimly lit shop, I could feel the weight of my decision pressing down on me. The shop smelled like old books and dust, a scent I had once found comforting, but now it made my skin crawl. The air was thick, like something was waiting for me to make one wrong move. Gregory looked up from behind the counter as I entered, his eyes locking onto mine. There was something in his gaze, something deep, something knowing. His gaze didn't just look at me, it pierced me. "You've come," he said, his voice gruff, as if he had been expecting me. "I thought you might." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat was tight, as though the air had thickened, become too dense to breathe. I just nodded, barely able to keep my legs steady beneath me. I had to understand. I needed to know what I was dealing with before it took everything from me. Gregory stood up slowly, his movements deliberate, like he was preparing for something. His hands shook slightly as he adjusted his glasses, the way an old man's hands often do, but there was something else there, something wrong. "It's not too late," he said, his voice quieter now, as if he were trying to keep the truth hidden. "But you're running out of time." I followed him to the back of the shop, to a small, hidden room that felt as though it had been forgotten by the world. It was filled with relics, strange, foreign objects that seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't name. But it was the table in the center of the room that caught my attention. It was covered with old cloths, piles of books, and strange artifacts. Everything seemed to radiate a dark, uncomfortable energy. "Sit," Gregory said, motioning to the chair in front of the table. I obeyed, my body moving on autopilot, though every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn around, to run. He didn't sit. Instead, he stood by the table, hands clasped behind his back. "You found the mirror," he said, his eyes narrowing. "And now you're here because you know, you feel it, the thing that's been waiting, the thing that's inside of you now." I swallowed hard. I did know. I could feel it, deep in my bones, the pull of the mirror, the way it had wormed its way into my soul, feeding off my fear, my obsession. "Tell me what it is," I choked out. "Tell me what I've done." Gregory's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw pity in them. But it was the kind of pity you feel for someone who is about to make a mistake they can't undo. "The mirror is not just a reflection," he began slowly, as if weighing each word. "It's a doorway, a portal, one that's been passed down for centuries. It was created by a group, a cult of sorts. They thought they could control what they called the other side. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't understand what they were opening." I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "The other side?" Gregory nodded. "Yes. The cult believed they could manipulate reality, shape it to their will. They used the mirror as a tool to peer into what lay beyond. But what they didn't realize was that they weren't looking into another world. They were looking into something else entirely. Something dark, something alive." My head spun. "Alive?" "Yes," Gregory whispered, his voice trembling now. "The mirror didn't just show them visions. It became a doorway. It allowed something else to cross over. At first, it was subtle, small things, but soon it grew stronger. And the people who used the mirror, they were no longer themselves. Their reflections took over, and their souls were trapped in the glass." I felt my stomach twist into knots. I had seen it, hadn't I? The reflection in the mirror wasn't just a reflection. It had been watching me, waiting for me. And now I understood. It wasn't my reflection that was staring back. It was something else. Something darker. Something that had been waiting for a long time to take my place. Gregory's eyes bore into mine. "It's been feeding off your obsession, your fear. The more you look into it, the more it grows, the more it becomes you. And eventually you'll fade, you'll become part of the mirror, and the thing in the glass will step into your life. Take your place." I felt sick. The air around me seemed to close in, thick and suffocating. It was like the walls were collapsing, the room was shrinking, and all I could think about was the reflection. The thing in the mirror that wasn't me. The thing that was slowly becoming me. "There's only one way to stop it," Gregory continued, his voice low and ominous. "You have to destroy the mirror. You have to break it before it's too late. Before it consumes you completely." I wanted to scream, to beg him to tell me how, but I already knew. It was already too late. The mirror had already won. I had always been curious. Perhaps too curious for my own good. Ever since I bought that antique mirror, I had felt an unshakable pull toward it. A force that drew me in, no matter how hard I tried to look away. I had told myself it was just a mirror, an object, an old relic with no power other than its reflection. But something in me knew, even then, that it was never going to be that simple. It started small at first, those little details that I dismissed. My reflection would shift slightly, too subtle to catch with a glance, but undeniable when I truly looked. My face, my expression, seemed to warp, just for a moment before returning to normal. It was nothing, I told myself. Just the lighting, just the angle. But then, I couldn't stop staring at it. Every time I passed the mirror, I found my eyes drifting back, caught by something I couldn't explain. But it wasn't just my reflection that had changed. It was me. Days turned into weeks, and the more I looked into the mirror, the harder it became to resist. Every time I stood before it, something inside me stirred, like a whispering voice I couldn't quite hear. I tried to shake it off, to push it down, but the urge to look grew stronger, more insistent, and with each glance my reflection became wrong. I could see it in my eyes first, those dark, hollow pits where my hazel eyes used to be. They weren't mine. And then, the smile. The grin that stretched wider and wider until it felt like my mouth couldn't contain it. I could feel it in my face, in my muscles, in my skin. It was as if I was being pulled in two directions, one toward the reflection and one away from it. And every time I looked into the glass, I was a little further gone. It wasn't just the mirror that changed. It was me. And then I saw it, really saw it, the thing in the mirror. It wasn't just mimicking me anymore. It wasn't just an image of me trapped behind glass. It was waiting. I remember the night I first understood what was happening. It had been another sleepless night, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I had spent hours staring into the mirror, unable to pull myself away. The reflection was clearer now, more distinct, more alive. I could see it grinning at me from behind the glass, its eyes gleaming with a cold, malicious hunger. And that grin, it was no longer just an imitation of my own smile. It had grown wider, more twisted, as if it were its own separate entity. It wasn't just a reflection, it was something else, something that wanted to take me. And that's when it spoke. A low, guttural voice that seemed to come from the depths of my own mind. "You're mine now, Claire," it whispered, its voice chilling, dripping with malice. "You've always been mine, and soon I'll take everything you are." I tried to look away. I tried to run, but my body wouldn't obey. My legs were frozen, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't escape. The reflection had claimed me. I could feel it in my bones, in my skin, in my very soul. It was inside me now, feeding on my fear, feeding on my desperation. I knew I couldn't fight it much longer. The mirror had already taken so much from me, and the more I stared into it, the more it took. It wasn't just showing me my reflection anymore, it was becoming me. I needed to destroy it. I had to break the mirror, smash it into pieces, and rid myself of the thing that had twisted my life into a nightmare. But when I tried to leave my apartment, when I reached for the door, I felt it. The pull. The need to return to the mirror, to stand before it, to look into the glass once more. My legs moved without me, my body dragging me back to that cursed object, as if I had no control. I couldn't fight it, not anymore. I reached for the hammer, my hands trembling, sweat dripping down my face. I could hear the reflection laughing in the back of my mind, mocking me, taunting me with its twisted grin. I swung the hammer down with all my strength, and the glass shattered with a deafening crack. The sound was like thunder in my ears, like a scream that echoed through my entire body. But the reflection didn't disappear, it didn't fade. The shattered mirror pieces still held it. It was as though the reflection was everywhere, scattered across the floor, in each jagged shard of glass. I couldn't escape it. The thing in the mirror had already taken over. It had already replaced me. I stumbled back, my vision spinning, my heart racing. It was too late. It had already consumed me. And then I heard it again, the laughter. Not from the reflection, but from me. My own voice echoing from every shard of glass, mocking me, laughing at me. And that's when I understood. I was gone. The reflection had taken me. And now it was wearing my face. I should have known from the moment I laid eyes on it. The antique mirror, sitting there in that dusty corner of the flea market, had called to me, whispering in a language I couldn't understand but felt deep in my bones. I should have listened to that voice in my head that screamed for me to turn around, to walk away. But instead, I reached out, paid for it, and took it home, thinking it was just a beautiful relic from the past. But I had no idea what I was inviting into my life. The first few days were fine, normal even. I admired the ornate frame, the craftsmanship that felt so much older than anything I'd ever seen. But then, the reflections began. At first, it was just a slight shift, a flicker in the glass, a momentary distortion. I chalked it up to the old age of the mirror, the way light bent through the warped glass. But each time I gazed into it, the reflection grew more unsettling. My face, at first so familiar, began to twist. The eyes, my eyes, became hollow, dark pits, like something was sucking the life out of them. The smile. It started small, just a flicker of something off. But over time it grew, wider, grotesque, a reflection of something darker, something that wasn't me. And yet, I couldn't pull away. The mirror called to me, louder and louder with every passing day. The pull became irresistible, like the mirror itself had a hold on me, an invisible thread wrapped tight around my chest. The more I looked, the more I saw. But it wasn't me I was seeing. It was something else, something that wasn't human. I started to lose track of time, of days, of what was real. The reflection in the glass became more than just an image. It became a presence. And one night I looked into the mirror and saw something that made my blood run cold. It wasn't me. It was it. The thing in the mirror wasn't my reflection anymore. It was watching me, its grin growing wider, its eyes, no longer mine, dark and empty, like pits that had swallowed every bit of light in the room. And then, in a voice that wasn't my own, it whispered, "You're mine now, Claire. You've always been mine. And soon I'll take everything you are." I could feel my breath catch in my chest, my heart racing as I stumbled away from the mirror. I tried to turn away, to run, but my legs felt heavy, unresponsive. It was as if the reflection had begun to pull me in, like a magnet, drawing me toward it against my will. I could still hear its voice in my head, echoing over and over, "You'll be gone, Claire, and I'll take your place." That was when I realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't the one looking into the mirror anymore. The reflection, that thing that had once mimicked me, had taken over. It had been feeding on my fear, my obsession, until it was stronger than I ever could have imagined. And now it was coming for me. I tried to fight it, I tried to resist, but I couldn't. The thing in the mirror had already claimed so much of me, and when I went to destroy it, to shatter the mirror, to rid myself of the thing that had twisted my life into a nightmare, it only got stronger. I swung the hammer with all my strength, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. But the reflection didn't fade, it didn't die. Instead, it splintered and spread across the floor, 1,000 shards of glass, each holding a twisted, warped version of my face. Each piece of broken glass reflected the same grin, the same empty eyes, the same hunger. I couldn't escape it. No matter what I did, it was still there, everywhere. It wasn't just in the glass anymore. It was inside me, twisting me, becoming me. The thing in the mirror had replaced me. And now, I was the one trapped in the glass, a broken, shattered reflection of a life that wasn't mine. The worst part? It wasn't just the mirror that had taken me. It was me, or what had become of me, that had taken my place. I was the one lost, trapped forever behind the glass. The thing wearing my face would go on living my life, laughing, mocking, while I was nothing more than a forgotten fragment of shattered mirror. And as the reflection of my face grinned at me, I realized the truth. I had already been lost. The thing in the mirror had won, and I was the one who would be forgotten. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.